Hunting or Bust, The Journey Onward by Master Atlan, in Chapter 38. No, Place for Heroes. This feels weird. Oh, grow up. It looks good on you. Sasuke fiddled with the sword and sheath now attached to his right hip. He struggled to get used to having a weapon heavier than a knife on his person now. He kept one hand on the hilt of the family sword and looked up at his brother curiously. Are you serious about sticking me with this thing? Of course I am, his brother nodded with a smile. That sword has been through a lot of battles and wars, and it's always done the job in the hands of an Uchiha. Dad fought with it, I fought with it. Itachi patted his shoulder. Now you'll be protected by it as well. He still didn't feel right taking this sword when Itachi could do so much more with it. His face twisted with uncertainty as he shook his head. I seriously think I should have Sasuke. Itachi's voice became dull, and he didn't look amused to still have this conversation. It's your blade now. You use it. End of conversation. Sasuke sighed before relenting and tapping the hilt of the sword. Let me ask you something in return. Itachi looked down at the brand new sheath that held the blade. Are you sure you want to use the same kind of weapon that guy used? Yeah, definitely. Sasuke nodded firmly with a confident smile. This will remind me what we're fighting against, and who it is we have to face at the end of that fight. Itachi merely smiled proudly at his little brother's proclamation. He looked so much older with that sword at his side. He would be the mightiest warrior remnant had ever seen. That being said, Sasuke groaned as his eyes panned over to look behind him with an annoyed grimace. Are we seriously letting these people tag along? Itachi looked up and at the sizable group of people around them that were going to join them from now on. The older brother rolled his eyes with a sigh and spoke in a hushed voice so only Sasuke could hear him. Don't start again. You know as well as I do that the two of us have no chance of fighting a group like the White Fang alone. We need to increase our ranks and enlist people that want to fight for our cause. But these people, Sasuke looked back over the less than respectable or reputable people that had come to join their new group. His eyes landed on a hulking green-haired man. A mercenary. His eyes shifted over to a blue-haired woman that packed her bag. An assassin. His eyes went blank with boredom. And trash. I heard that, you little brat. Deidara yelled and waved his arms around in anger as the dozens other people gathered with them ignored him. I'll kick your ass. And we're orphans traveling like nomads about to form a team to counter a terrorist group, Itachi repeated. All of these people want to do some good, make a change, get a second chance to do something right, Itachi said with a hopeful smile and a shrug. We have to believe they want to do the same thing. The younger Uchiha looked uncertain. Can we trust them? We can watch them for now. We'll see if they have our trust after. Fine, but the young swordsman pulled on the new black jacket with their symbol on its back. But do we seriously have to wear these silly little uniforms? They look so stupid and ostentatious. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting from that guy, but could he have at least tried? Hate, all of my hate. Itachi tried to ignore Deidara's fiery temper, an exclamation while the others held him back from mauling Sasuke. The elder brother fiddled with the lapel of his own jacket. Well, the White Fang is dressed in white with the emblem on the back. Deidara thought it would be poetic if we were in black. Sasuke's blank stare was the only answer he needed to give as Sasuke sighed as his shoulders slumped. Yeah, I don't know either. You too, Itachi. Itachi looked up and saw that the rest of their new group had finished packing up their belongings and provisions. He nodded and picked up his own bag. Okay, everyone, are you all ready? He didn't get a proper answer as the large group of people just stared at him like they were expecting something. Itachi blinked in confusion and looked around at them all. Is something wrong? Is that it? Come on, man, I was expecting you to say something cool. Speech! Itachi was surprised by the demand that was quickly agreed upon almost anonymously by everyone present. Dodo Chica stepped forward and re-entered everyone silently as they waited for him to speak. He looked out over the crowd. I guess I should probably start by saying thank you all for coming to fight this cause. I don't know all your names, and I'm sure you don't know ours, but I hope to learn them. I'm sure words spread rather quickly from ear to ear about what we're going to do, but I'm going to be honest with you right now. Itachi's eyes narrowed while he looked out at all of them. This isn't a game. There was a soft round of muttering going through the crowd of people before he continued. This isn't going to be for fun, isn't a joke, and we aren't going to laugh about it when this is over. This is real. This is war we're declaring on the White Fang. Itachi's eyes hardened as he looked over them. I know some of you may come from checkered past, but this isn't your opportunity to escape them. This is your chance to make up for them. Do some right to balance out your wrong. If you just want to fight, leave. If you just want to cause trouble, leave. If you only want to do this to hurt fondness, leave. If you're doing this for glory, leave. Itachi remembered the tales his father once told him while his mother, and a baby Sasuke sat around the fire at night. The stories of the old Uchiha and the duties they carried out. The younger man opened his eyes again. We don't do this for praise. We won't be rewarded. We may not even be thanked for this job, but we're going to do it because we are the ones that can bear this weight. We have this duty, no matter how hard it may be, and if you choose to take it, to fight against the White Fang and protect the people, I will happily call you my brother in arms. He saw the mix of firm nods and uncertain looks across the crowd before he hefted up his bag. If we don't have anything else to say, then let's go. They started filing back and heading out into the forest as Itachi and Sasuke brought up the rear. The younger brother chuckled and looked up at Itachi with a small smirk. Good speech, but those were the same things that always told you about our ancestors, right? The awkward silence as Itachi failed to respond was the only response he needed. It's okay. I won't tell them that. Same thing goes for you, Sasuke. The younger brother looked up to see Itachi's eyes had narrowed while they walked alongside each other. This is your last chance. If this isn't what you want to do, turn back now. He wanted to give his little brother one last chance to decide. They wouldn't be staying from town to town or city to city anymore. Most likely they would be traveling through the forest and make camp in grim territory to avoid getting caught by anyone. He remembered growing up a lot like this with mother and father when they were avoiding parties that wanted to hunt the Uchiha. Before Sasuke was even born, he made his choice, but Sasuke still had to make his. So, what will it be? Does it even have to be said? Sasuke pounded his chest and looked up at Itachi with a confident smile. I'm by your side, Itachi, through and through, until the end. Hunting. Another crack of thunder rung overhead as Sasuke kept his head hung in silence. After his announcement at accepting the plan his former friends and brother had for him, the entire room went silent. The other Beacon kids had stopped causing a commotion or attempting to escape after hearing what he said, that he was going to kill Naruto. After that, they just seemed to lose their will to fight back, like the last hope that this really was all just one big elaborate, if truly horrific joke had gotten up in flames. Just so you know, this doesn't mean you get our trust back. Sasuke's eyes drifted over and he spotted Deidara in the corner of them with a neutral expression. The bomber kept looking down at him. You got a long way to go before you can get that back. Deidara was silent for a moment after being given a small nod to the younger man. But I'm glad to see you aren't so far gone you'd forsaken Itachi again, Sasuke. Before Sasuke could respond, Kiba had spoken up as the only voice left in the warehouse. He looked in the mirror to see the others look at the tattooed boy while Kiba lifted his head. I don't know what's going on. I really don't. I don't know if this is all true, if this is all as obvious as it seems, or if there's something behind it all. I can't figure it out. I'm so confused right now that I feel like my goddamn head is spinning. He grit his teeth so hard the sound of grinding was almost audible, and I'm pissed off. Really, really pissed off. Pissed off at you, at Naruto, myself, and these assholes too. He yelled with ire and a bite towards the other two Uchiha members before huffing through his nose and turning back to stare at Sasuke's back. I'm pissed off and confused about a lot of things right now, but I know one thing for certain. Kiba narrowed his eyes. You're lying. The focus all went towards Kiba as he spoke without hesitation or doubt. I don't know how this happened, and I don't know how much we know about you two is even true, but you're friends. That's the truth that you can't deny. After what I've seen, you would never kill Sasuke, so don't even say it. Kiba tried to stand up, but Gurren and Raika quickly forced him back on his knees. Even so, Kiba yelled, We'll get out of this. We'll find a way. So just focus on fighting back, on getting out of here, on finding Naruto, and getting back to Beacon. And Kiba didn't hate dancing around the subject and preferred to just state it. Probably just hearing Sasuke lie and say he would kill Naruto had pissed him off, especially since the others seemed to have believed it. Sasuke had respected that about him, but it wasn't as simple as trying to figure out a way to escape. The hands were tied literally and figuratively. His hands were bound together in fact, and if Itachi came here with Naruto in hand, this situation would become even harder to manage. They didn't have many options, but they didn't need many, and Sasuke was fortunate that at that that moment, everyone was either focused on Kiba or him, because when Sasuke looked up in the mirror, he spotted something he was sure only he had noticed. Pure opened her eye and looking in the mirror back at him. Deidara walked back over to his side and narrowed his eyes. Well, Sasuke, is that true? He sighed and shook his head. Why am I even asking that? You're a liar. Of course you'd lie to us again. The blonde's face twisted in anger and disappointment. Well, we'll see what kind of choice you make when Itachi... Deidara was caught off as Sasuke jumped to his feet and slammed the top of his head into the blonde's chin. Deidara's aura protected him from a serious injury as he grabbed Sasuke's shoulder and forced him down on his knees. You little fucker, you! Sasuke struggled against Deidara's pressure, keeping his stance firm and forcing Deidara to step back as she pushed forward. God, Gurren, Reika, help me with him! He quickly pushed Kiba down and went over to help Deidara with the Rowdy Uchiha, making sure not to get in his line of sight so he couldn't copy their semblances. They each grabbed one of his arms locked behind his back and pulled him away from Deidara. The blonde groaned, rubbing his chin before pointing at Sasuke with a growl. You're really pushing it, you little shit. If you actually thought you were going to get away with just pushing me, then you... Deidara froze in shock as he finally noticed Sasuke's eyes. They had changed red with his semblance and narrowed with contempt towards Deidara, with Gurren and Reika directly behind him. Get away from him! He was caught off as Sasuke's foot struck his chin again. The two older vigilantes looked down in shock, noticing the crystals around Sasuke's hand starting to grow brightly before they were caught in the point-blank explosion. Hunting. Itachi started catching his breath as the soft patter of rain drifted into his ears. He looked back over again and saw Naruto's body was still lying across the ground. His eyes were focused on the blonde's motionless form and tried to spot any subtle movements the downed boy might make, but none were made. That was all the confirmation Itachi needed. As he fell to one knee and gripped his arm tightly, his hand started to shake as the blue glow faded from his palm and the dust started to power down. He struggled for air as he looked at where the dust was embedded in his arm. The skin around the dust crystals was discolored, and the veins were visible along his arm. A groan escaped as he tried to focus through the agony. Every time he used the dust, no, sometimes not even using it, he felt pain run up every nerve around his arm. His muscles felt exposed and like they were lit on fire. Not only that, but he had lost the most feeling in his right arm. He could still only just close his hand to change between which dust to use, but even that took effort some time. That damn doctor must have botched the operation or something, because when they went back to fix it, he had up and left town, bastard. But it certainly had its perks. Wielding the elements in battle made fighting much easier, and a potable source of lightning, fire, wind, and ice was handy at all times. It hurt like hell, but it was necessary. He finally started to catch his breath as the pain coursing through his arms started to subside. He let out a shaky breath of relief as his shoulders sagged. Almost done. Grab him, get him to the warehouse, and Sasuke will finish it there. He knew Sasuke would hate him for doing this, but at least they wouldn't be separated anymore. This would all be over. They would be a family. His eyes widened in shock as he turned around and saw Naruto slowly lift himself up on his hands and knees, a thin line of blood spilling from his chin and onto the floor as the ice in his stomach wound creaked with each movement. The young faunus continued to let out a low groan and growl that mixed with the gurgle of blood in his mouth. Itachi stood up and watched the boy in utter shock. He was certain he had passed out from the last attack. He shouldn't even be able to stand up with that wound in his stomach. So how was he doing this? Naruto's aura began to peak, a strange orange emanation from around the blonde's body as he continued to shake on the floor. But just then the aura spiked even more, the glow changing from just an outline around the boy's body into a full cover that shrouded his entire form. His arms and hands disappeared under the bright orange glow, becoming akin to claws that buried into the concrete like wet sand. The solid glow encompassed the rest of his body, his claws, pants, skin, and hair, everything distinguishable on the teen's body being overtaken by his orange aura. At last, the boy turned back to face his attacker as his face was the last thing covered by the aura. His eyes were a lighter shade of orange, the cloak around his fox ears spiking up to make them look even larger as he opened his mouth and roared. The orange creature's roar came to an end, and Itachi just stared in silent shock as the fawn is planted on his hands and feet like a genuine beast. Though Uchiha could only stare as the boy's muffled and scratchy voice huffed through the aura covering his entire body. He couldn't even spot him inside the heavy orange shroud. Uchiha narrowed his eyes and gripped his gun tightly as he stepped forward. I'm surprised you have something like this still in your sleeve. Why did you? Naruto sprinted forward, propelling himself across the warehouse on his hands and knees as he charged the older man like a wild animal. Itachi quickly jumped to the side, raising his weapon up in the block as Naruto's fist came in like a wrecking ball and smacked him through the gun and into Itachi's arms. Itachi gasped in pain as he felt the massive pressure push against his aura. He was sent flying into a pile of boxes and broken wood. Itachi lifted his head with a pained moan and looked down at the shattered remains of the gun in his hand. He looked up just in time to see Naruto pouncing at him with his arm reeled back into attack. Itachi leapt over Naruto's attack as the fawn swiped and left a deep furrow where his hand had changed into a claw and dug through the concrete. Itachi spun through the air and activated his dust as his hand glowed red, and he fired rapid blasts of fire over Naruto's cloaked body. The fawn's aura-clad body jerked and bent along with the fiery explosions before raising his head and roaring at his assailant. Itachi landed and then quickly had to dodge again as Naruto chased after him with furious intent. His gargles and screams echoed around the broken-down warehouse as he slashed at Itachi and made the other man retreat. The black-haired man sidestepped a swipe to his head as he slammed his palm against the fawn's temple, releasing a shock of electricity but failed to stop the rampaging monster at all. A sharp swipe to the side forced Itachi to flip away. When he landed, he activated the dust and released a powerful gust of wind and ice that enveloped the fawn completely. But the aura-clad boy just shook the ice off without a care and roared again. He decided not to risk close quarters combat while his opponent was clad head to toe in aura. As Naruto charged forward to attack him again, Itachi slid out of the way and ran towards the gaping hole that used to be the doors. Once he was outside, he slid to across the wet ground and waited outside for his opponent to chase after him. Itachi stood in the rain and watched the fawn slow down and look around like a wild, frantic beast. He narrowed his eyes and activated his dust again. A faint blue glow on his hand and a bone-chilling freeze running up his arm. When Naruto came running out to attack, he'd freeze the rainwater along the ground and stopped his movement completely. He'd focused on what came after that. Once it happened, he saw Naruto turn towards him as Itachi raised his hand. Naruto roared as he pulled his fist back as far as possible. He threw his entire body into the punch as the aura around his fist extended out and grew 10 times its size. It demolished the remaining part of the wall and uprooted the ground as it barreled towards Itachi like a speeding truck. Itachi's eyes widened and he raised his hand and changed it to wind. A cushion of wind blew him back into a pile of metal girders as the massive aura fist retracted back to Naruto's arm. The Uchiha pulled himself out of the rubble with a pain groaned and heard another wild roar from the young fawness. He looked up, seeing Naruto clasp his hands together and stretch them out before bringing them down on Itachi like a hammer. The older man escaped from the pile of metal and just barely avoided the destructive force of the aura attack. Lightning started sparking off his fingers, bolts of plasma spreading out over the puddles of water before they fired out at Naruto. The aura-clad fawness screamed as lightning danced over his body, the electricity dipping and spreading around the orange cloak before he roared and slammed the ground to clear it away. This wasn't possible. This strength, this power, this look, this wasn't just a coincidence. Itachi yelled, "What are you? How can you do something like this?" As he waited for an answer, he realized he wasn't going to get one. The fawn's attention darted around and looked at him curiously before growling again. He lowered himself back into his animal stance and looked ready to pounce. Itachi caught his breath before asking, he nodded his eyes. "Can you hear me?" Naruto sprinted forward and forced his enemy to defend as he attacked. Hunting. In the middle of the explosion, Sasuke's senses were in total whack. His eyes and ears were still reeling from the blast. His equilibrium was shot as he fell to his knees, at least having the state of mind to see that Deidara and the others were on their back while his friends called out to him. And then he felt it, like his hands had been lit on fire. They screamed out in incredible agony that nearly made him pass out. He struggled to breathe and looked down at the mangled state his hands were in. Apparently, even with aura to protect him, releasing an explosion within your hands while they were still together didn't do much to protect him. The skin along his palms were seared through, burned red and black with some shards of crystal sticking out from the skin. Some of his nails had been blown off and two of the digits joints were bent oddly, but if he didn't have aura, his hands would be nothing but stumps right now. Sasuke powered through the pain, lowering his hands out of sight as his hearing started to adjust. He heard his friends call out to him while their captors were still knocked down. He pushed himself up to his feet and quickly ran towards the beacon students to help release them, but he had to jump up as crystals came spreading along the floor and attempting to lock his feet. The crystal wall blocked him from his friends as he looked back at Rega and Gurren all lifting themselves up. "Stop him!" Lidra's palm started to spark and the blonde yelled, releasing an explosive blast of fire at Sasuke. He had to quickly match the blast, activating Mirror and canceling the explosion with one of his own despite the pain piercing his hands. With the massive cloud of smoke between them, Sasuke ran around the wall of crystal to reach his friend, but from the smoke a jagged blade swung out for his head. As he barely ducked it, a foot came out and struck his knee, toppling him to the floor before he looked up to see Reika preparing to kick again. He jumped up to avoid a strike to the chin and backed up in time for the two swords to close in on him from both sides. Sasuke quickly copied his semblance, blocking one sword with his forearm and halting the other with the bolt of lightning. His arm went stiff, feeling his aura take the blunt of the attack, but Sasuke had to quickly turn as Reika swung for him again. All these years, and Reika was still a truly exceptional swordsman, even being able to follow his attacks before his eyes, and they still nearly blurred from existence. Sasuke flipped away and felt his foot get caught in the floor. He looked down to see his shoe sneered by the pink crystal. He flipped his foot out before the crystal could cover his whole shoe and had to quickly run before she caught him again. As long as Gurren had rock, cement, water, or even cloth to use, she could make a crystal to fight or catch her targets. Sasuke sprinted around the wall and had a clear path to his friends, but instead he made a dash for where his and Ruby's weapons laid across the table. He almost reached it before he felt a sharp tug on his collar that stopped him from going any further. Through his peripherals, he saw Reika had grabbed him and halted his attempt to reach the weapons and fight back. He was almost pulled off his feet. "No!" he yelled at the top of his lungs as his leg kicked out into the bottom of the table and knocked the weapons into the air. This was with as much power as he could muster. He jumped into the air with one leg while still being held back by the collar. He stretched out, catching Merchant Master by its hilt with its foot before kicking it through the air. "Pyrrha!" As the sharp rapier flew overhead and towards the beacon students, the teens all looked in surprise to see the red-haired warrior wake from her slumber and already crouch on her feet without her legs being confined with rope or locks. As she jumped into the air and turned, the rapier ripped through the rope along her arms, and she snatched the sword before falling to the ground again. With her friends surrounding her, she raised her hand up and back down. The chains around her arms and legs were ripped off by her polarity and clattered to the floor. With their constraints gone, Yang was the first to recover as she screamed at the top of her lungs and fire burst off her form. The flames of her aura burned away the cloth in her mouth and turned her eyes red as she leapt off the ground. And for Reika, the green-haired man had to quickly release Sasuke and block her ballistic charge with his blade. Even with the guard, he was forced back a few feet before slipping the blades between her arms and flipping Yang off her feet. The blonde stumbled on her feet and looked up as Reika came charging in and swung his swords down on her, but Blake came in at her side and knocked her back as the dual sword sliced her through. Reika was surprised when the girl's corpse dissolved into nothing, and as she came jumping at him from the side and landing a punch across his cheek. Pyrrha tossed twice her weapon, and the Schneekers fell into her fighting stance before darting forward. Rapid discharges of her dust filled one side of the empty building as the students helped each other recover. Kiba ripped the cloth out of his mouth and immediately went to undo the rope tying Tenten together. When she was free, he gently picked up the unconscious girl and prepared to carry her out. Ren and Nora ran over to the weapons and threw the remaining ones to their owners. Blake and Yang caught their respective arms and charged in to help their friends in the fight. Ren quickly picked up Crescent Rose and passed it to Ruby as Nora threw a vomit reflection to Sasuke. "Sasuke, catch!" His hands went up on reflex to catch it, but he immediately regretted the action when it hit his injured hand. He screamed and cradled his arm as his vision swirled. He took a sharp breath and looked up to see them staring at him in worry. Sasuke closed his eyes and forced his hand around his sheath, holding back the pain groan as he attached it to its tip and left a bloody handprint on the white sheath. A massive wall of ice sprouted up from the middle of the building and grew up to spread over the ceiling. Weiss lifted the point of her sword up after blocking the Uchiha members off on the other side. The Beacon students came together and Ruby looked at the cracking wall. "They're coming! What do? We can't fight them!" Sasuke yelled. "We have to get out of here! Run!" There was no argument as they sprinted out the building and into the street in the rain. They heard a loud explosion behind them as they blasted through the wall of ice, and the Uchiha started chasing after them. The Beacon students sprinted through the empty streets as they escaped from their captors. They didn't dare to look back. They did everything they could to stay at top speed. Sasuke knew he had to help his friends escape, but he was too focused on making it across the city. He was heading straight to the industrial district where Naruto and Itachi were. "Sasuke, stop now!" Leader yelled behind them, all of the students drowning out his warnings as they focused on outrunning them. The blonde grit his teeth and yelled again, "Damn it, I told you to stop!" They refused. Leader came to a sliding stop along the slippery road. Gurren and Rega came to a halt beside him as he extended his hand and roared, "I said stop!" A massive bang rang out behind them, and Sasuke knew in an instant that Leader had released another explosion. He prepared to turn and encounter it with his own. A blast split in front of them before ever coming close, and they saw their boisterous blonde stopping it. When the blast died out, Yang threw her fist back and launched herself forward with a powerful blast. She flew at the Uchiha member like a rocket and forced them back. She fired another blast to make her spin as she lashed out with her kick and caught the leader in the side of his head. She fired a quick blast at Rega and punched towards Gurren as a wall of crystal raced towards them with her flames dancing over the surface. Rega came at her side but was intercepted by Blake, Weiss, and Ruby coming to protect her. The older man narrowed his eyes and quickly defended against the rapid blade, rapier, and sheath strikes that attempted to overwhelm him. Random bursts of speed, clones, dust, and electricity followed as they held each other off. Leader jumped back up on his feet and charged at Yang while she was trying to break down the crystal wall. She noticed him approaching and fired a blast of kinetic energy directly for his head. He countered the blast with a smaller explosion and reached through the smoke to grab Yang's arm. He pulled the young girl off of her feet and kicked out her leg, making her flip in the air long enough for him to blow her away with a blast. Yang rolled along the wall pavement before stopping on her feet and fixing into a boxer stance. "You're gonna pay for that, prick!" Leader scowled and let out a few small bursts of fire pop over his palm. "Bring it, bitch!" "Here we come!" Ren and Nora came running in together towards the crystal wall. Nora cupped her hands and Ren slipped his foot in her grasp as she tossed him over the top of the wall to face Gurren again. Nora charged forward and, with extra power in her limbs, started pounding into the wall and climbed over it like a monkey. She finally climbed over it and yelled with force in her usually bubbly voice, "Round 2! Sasuke!" Kiba carried Tenten over to an alley and hid away to protect the unconscious girl from the intense battle taking place in the street. The tattooed boy looked over at the injured swordsman. "You're heading over to help to Naruto, right? Then get going." Sasuke was surprised by his order. "We'll take care of this. Just go." "John, you go with them," Pierce said to her leader. "I promise we'll handle them and come back safe." What? "Ruby, you go with them. They'll need help." "Huh?" The young leader looked at Blake in shock. "But I'm fighting. Don't argue, you dunce!" Weiss yelled as she fired icicles at Reika as he effortlessly shattered the projectiles. "Just go!" And Sasuke was silent at their orders and spared Kiba one last look. He saw the deep scowl on the Uzumaki's face that didn't falter for even a moment. He knew instantly that what had happened wasn't forgotten or forgiven, just that they couldn't focus on that right now. Sasuke took a sharp inhale through his nose and grabbed his weapon before throwing it behind him. "Pyrrha!" The champion reached out and caught the white sheath in her hand. As her other instantly went up to the hilt, she knew Sasuke. She saw Sasuke sprint down the street, and John hesitated, giving them one last look back before following after him. A blur of red and a flutter of rose petals passed her side as she turned around. Weiss and Blake jumped back to avoid the bolt of lightning that chased them. Yang was blasted back after guarding against a powerful explosion, and Ren and Nora came barreling through the crystal wall after defending themselves from the quick pillar of pink crystal that sprouted from the ground. The Gurren and the Reika slowly spread together and narrowed their eyes at the wall of students. Pyrrha stepped forward, drawing Volmid from its scabbard before aiming the tip of the katana at her opponents. Her friends and teammates stepped up to her side as she declared, "From this point on, you will not pass us." "We'll see about that." Hunting. Another blast of fire and searing hot wind flowed over him before being quickly switched out for freezing cold rain. Itachi lifted his head again and gripped his wrist tightly as the burn sensation settled along his arm. He looked up and saw his beast-like adversary lift himself up from the smoke and fire, only again, even after being bombarded with fire and ice, being blown away by squalls of concentrated wind and shocked with bolts of lightning. He didn't seem to pay it any mind. Itachi wasn't sure how much longer he could do this. He didn't know how much longer this dust would still be potent and if his aura could keep fueling his defenses in offense. This was what he got for not having a more defendable weapon. He only had his own arrogance to blame for this, but he couldn't give up. If he could capture this boy and bring him back to Sasuke and the others, it would be over. His family would be whole again. For that, he would face any monster or foe. He saw Naruto spot him again. The fox fauna tilted his animal-like head in wonder and focused on him like those black-orange eyes before a deep growl came from his throat. Itachi glared and gripped his hand tightly as he channeled lightning into his palm. His palm glowed yellow and electricity traveled between his fingers as Naruto charged. Naruto's hand snapped and stretched out towards Itachi like a bullet. The Uchiha knocked the hand aside with a hammer strike, knocking it down and uproaring the pavement beside him. The knocked aside aura claw jumped and came swinging into his side like a whip, but Itachi ducked under it and sprinted forward. He closed the distance to Naruto and palmed the boy's face before slamming him into the ground and releasing the electricity. The electric shock spread out over the wet concrete, and he was sure that he had finally downed the furnace. Itachi yelled in pain as Naruto's fist pulled back in and slammed into his back. He was slung off Naruto and rolled on the ground before Naruto jumped back up to his feet. He roared and threw his arms out as the aura around them stretched out several meters. He howled and leapt at Itachi, spinning through the air as his arms struck like whips and shredded through concrete and metal. Itachi quickly slammed his hand into the ground, blew himself up into the air with his wind dust. He flew up over Naruto and released another burst of air that knocked the furnace into the ground, but not before Naruto's arms rolled over and grabbed Itachi's foot before pulling him out of the air. Itachi slammed into the pavement so hard it cracked before he was lifted high up in the air and slammed back down. Itachi swung up and bashed around like a doll before being tossed aside into a pile of scrap and barrels. Itachi laid in the pile of trash with a pain groan and gasped for air as he felt the rain pelt him. His head fell to the side and saw Naruto already coming at him with a wild yell. Itachi activated his wind and rolled off the pile of metal before holding his hand out and blasting the pile at Naruto. The shards and barrels of metal went flying at Naruto like bullets as the aura-clad furnace charged around them. He didn't even seem to reach the barrage of attacks before one corner of a barrel slammed against the corner of his head and sent him sprawling over the floor. Itachi looked at the scene in surprise as he stood back up. He watched Naruto groggily lift himself up before landing back in his four-legged stance and catch his breath. Itachi's eyes widened as he finally started to calm down and look at the situation with more focus. He wasn't invulnerable. No one was. It was just aura. His aura covered his entire body like a suit of armor, but that wasn't much different from most people. His might make him stronger and even tougher to hit, but if he kept attacking, then Naruto's aura will falter just like anyone else. There were still the injuries before he covered himself in aura, but he couldn't keep fighting forever. He might fight like a wild animal, but he was still just a person underneath. Itachi could beat him. Naruto finally seemed to recover and released the berserker roar as he charged at Itachi. Itachi roared as well, sprinting to meet the furnace head on. Naruto roared his hand back and shifted his aura into a claw that swung at the Uchiha's head. Itachi turned and evaded the swipe as he slipped by the furnace and wrapped his arm around the boy's head. He pulled Naruto off his feet and slammed him down on his back before blasting the furnace away with an intense torrent of wind. Naruto's body bounced along the concrete before stopping on the spot and throwing a fist out at Itachi that extended and expanded to overwhelm the Uchiha. Itachi aimed down to lift himself off with a gust of wind, but realized his wind dust had been used up. He clicked his teeth and jumped backwards before diving out of the way of Naruto's colossal attack. The gigantic aura hand shrunk back down to normal and reeled back into Naruto before he yelled and started running at Itachi on all fours. Itachi narrowed his eyes and looked down by his feet to see several thin, sharp scrapes of sheet metal being bombarded by the rain. He dropped to his knees and activated his ice before snapping his hand back up. The rain and sheet metal splashed up in front of him and waved his hand as the water froze around the metal. Several icicles with jagged metal fell in front of Itachi before he snatched them from the air. He felt his ice dust run out and quickly switch it to lightning as he pulled the icicle back. With a quick yell, he threw them as hard as possible as they were propelled forward with the help of the electric shock. The icicles lunged forward at incredible speeds towards Naruto as he continued charging forward. Most of them broke and missed him completely, but when he came out the other side, he had an icicle or shard sticking out of his shoulder, abdomen, and leg. But he yelled and ran at Itachi without a care for the object that pierced his aura and body. He was like a grim, mindless focused merely on attacking his target. Itachi stood up tall and clenched his fist, struggling to close his right hand as he felt the electric glow slowly fade from his palm. He clicked his teeth as Naruto leapt up high and swung his stretched out arms down towards Itachi. Itachi leapt over the first arm and used it as a board to jump over the next one that came swinging down. Itachi looked up and saw Naruto came flying down at him like a missile and slammed into his chest. He flew back into the ground to see Naruto had anchored himself in the concrete and pulled himself down into him like a slingshot. Apparently, he wasn't as mindless as expected. Itachi did a kick up to avoid Naruto slamming down on his head. He heard the concrete break behind him and did a spin kick that landed beneath Naruto's empty eyes. The aura-clad furnace let out a pained, distorted yell before Itachi grabbed his arm and pulled him back in for a sharp punch. It didn't seem to do much, so he grabbed the arm and attempted to flip Naruto over again, but was countered when the arm straightened his grasp and did nothing to lift Naruto off his feet. Itachi turned and raised his shoulder as the fist came and slammed into it, lifting him off his feet. He was pulled back in with the arm still in his grasp, but blocked the second punch with his right palm. Itachi started whining in pain, but he gritted his teeth and pulled through it. He activated the fire dust and released the point-blank explosion that blew Naruto away. Itachi turned and raised his shoulder as the fist came and slammed into it, lifting him off his feet. He was pulled back in with the arm still in his grasp, but blocked the second punch with his right arm. Itachi was whining in pain, but he gritted his teeth and powered through it. He activated the fire dust and released a point-blank explosion that blew Naruto away. Itachi landed on his feet and gripped his arm as he saw the red glow in his hand start to flutterate. He knew that there wasn't much power left in his fire dust, and once that had run out, he would have to choose another method of attack. He looked up and saw Naruto slowly stalk towards him on all fours. Itachi quickly bolted in the opposite direction as fast as he could, making large splashes as he ran through the puddles. He looked back to see Naruto sprinting after him and roaring on all fours. Itachi banked to the side and felt Naruto pass him as he ran back to the warehouse their fight had started in. He looked back and saw Naruto on his trail as he stretched out an arm to grab him. Itachi flipped back and over the arm before landing on the aura construct and flipped over it again. He cleaved over Naruto's body and turned in the air before releasing a massive blast of fire against Naruto's back. He sent the furnace screening into the opposite wall and shattered incompletely, bringing the entire dilapidating building crashing down in a cloud of dust and smoke. Itachi landed just outside the pile that was formerly the warehouse. He laid in the rain, gripping his arm from the excruciating pain that felt like it went down to his bone. He raised his arm up into view and saw that all four crystals no longer glowed or had any power left in them, and he felt the same, panting to catch his breath as his hand continued to shudder. He knew he barely had any aura left in him, using it before to guard against the heavy attacks Naruto threw and to fuel the dust he used to fight back. Even with some of the remains of his aura, Itachi knew there would be bruises and cuts around his body that would take time to heal. This was one of the most exhausting fights he had ever had, considering he wasn't trying to kill his opponent, but after everything that happened, he wasn't even sure if the furnace was. Naruto popped out of the rubble and turned to face Itachi again. The Uchiha seemed to panic and tried to get himself up to his feet as Naruto started running towards him, his body stumbling even on all fours, but still charging forward. Itachi's eyes changed red and he prepared to use semblance. The cloak of aura that covered Naruto's body suddenly disappeared. The orange cover that hid Naruto's features and body suddenly dissipated and faded away just like anyone else's aura. His eyes widened and he toppled off his feet and into the ground. All Naruto could do on the ground was scream in pain and clutch the red eyes that was still stuck on his chest. His throat closed up before vomit filled his mouth, and he started retching all over the ground. His eyes filled with tears from the pain as he noticed specks and drops of blood mixed with his bile. His vision barely focused enough to notice the icicles and shards that still stuck over his body. Oh God, it happened again, and he was out of aura. Naruto barely lifted his head before a foot came in and slammed against his cheek. He tumbled back into the ground and groaned in pain as Itachi came walking up to his side. The fauna struggled to lift his head and looked up at his attacker as lightning illuminated the sky. The thunder cracked and Itachi narrowed his eyes. What are you? Hunting? Duh! Then it created another explosion that he thought hit the bow-wearing girl directly, but she escaped with her shadow once again. He had to quickly sidestep and dodge plague slashes and strike before her loud blonde friend came flying down between them and fired another shotgun blast. Did quickly countered with his own blast and had to rapidly match her shots with his explosion. And Yang's fist popped out of the fire and went straight for Didder's head as he quickly ducked beneath it. The blondes exchange quickly strikes and punches. Didder forced to take the defensive against the girl's superior striking power. Yang's rage peaked, and Didder noticed the increase of power in her punches as he felt the pain even through his aura. When Yang's fist came in, he countered their power with an explosion, but that only seemed to infuriate Yang more as she flared her nostrils and continued to press forward. Blake came in towards his side, and the blonde bomber had to quickly avoid the slashes from both her swords and Yang punches. A barrage of purple slashes, kinetic blasts, and explosions were exchanged between the three combatants. Blake was shocked that Uchiha followers' surprising agility and dexterity to hold them off for so long. Blake and Yang were both stopped when Didder grabbed their blade and fist. Their eyes widened when they were quickly enveloped in a point-blank explosion that blew them back. Blake grit her teeth and yelled as she pulled her arm in. Ha! Deidre was pulled in by the ribbon Blake was wrapped around that Blake had wrapped around his ankle during their exchange. He was pulled across the wet street as Yang recovered and pounced at his downed form. Deidre could only raise his arm to guard as Yang's powerful punch landed on his cross and cracked the ground, and as he yelled in pain, he spread out his arm and released the massive explosion that blasted Yang and Blake away. The two girls fell back into their fighting stances as Deidre lifted himself up. Part of his sleeves burned off and a small burn on his arm that he paid no mind to. The partner dashed back in at him as Deidre yelled. Blake's blade clashed along the length of the crystal as he flipped back to avoid Guren's attack. When she landed back on her feet, Weiss waved her fingers around and created a glyph under her feet that propelled her forward. A large spire of blue crystal spouted up from the rain between them, and Weiss' rapier skid across it in a shower of sparks. Weiss stumbled from her failed attack, and Guren fired several small crystals at her back. Pure stepped in and knocked the projectiles away with Sasuke's sword. The champion deflected all of Guren's attacks before spinning the blade in her hand and dashing at her foe. The blonde-haired woman quickly created a long staff of crystals that she used to block Pure's strikes. Pure quickly righted herself and attacked again. The blonde and the blade and crystal clashing in bursts of speed, while Pure fired a blast from the end of the shotgun sheath. Guren spun her crystal staff to negate the fiery blast and made a small blade to block Weiss's surprise attack. The former assassin held back the champion and Harris as the two students rapidly dashed an attack instinct to overwhelm her. Guren held them off by raising pillars of her crystal up and forcing the two girls to move around them before they barreled into them. Weiss struggled to get through the labyrinth of crystal as Pure jumped on top of one and spotted Guren. She manipulated the katana with her polarity and threw it at Guren to force her back. The Uchiha follower blocked the blade as it flew through the air and back into Pure's hand as the redhead pounced down on her. The redhead brought the blade down with extreme accuracy and started pressing the assassin back as Gurren's crystal staff broke, and she had to quickly replace it with another crystal construct. Gurren was shocked when she found herself inside a spinning black glyph that locked her in place before launching her back at Pyrrha. Pyrrha caught her in a close line and sent her crashing into the street. Gurren opened one eye and looked around to see herself surrounded by white cliffs. She spotted Weiss holding out her blade with her eyes closed before they opened again, and she was propelled forward by one of the white cliffs. Gurren protected herself with the pillar of crystals as Weiss's blade skidded across before she landed against another glyph and was launched back towards Gurren to attack. Weiss disappeared in a white blur as her attacks bounced off against Gurren's defenses and pillars. Weiss came to a stop beside Pyrrha, and the two huntresses in training looked where Gurren had surrounded herself in a complete barrier of a crystal. The crystal exploded out in every direction to reveal Gurren with two new weapons in her hands. The two Beacon students shared a look before sprinting in and clashing their weapons with Gurren's. Ren looked back to avoid the slash of Rhaega's blades before they could take his head. He flipped back to his feet and ran in, focusing his aura around his body as he threw out a palm strike. It impacted against the sword before slipping off as Rhaega moved and brought another of his blades down on his back. "Ha!" Nora exclaimed as she kicked the blade away from Ren as she brought another kick down on Rhaega's collarbone. The mercenary grit his teeth and knocked the energetic girl away before Ren landed a strike to his gut. Rhaega ignored the pain and forced Ren to retreat as he swung his blade down for his head. Rhaega partners came together and shared a look before nodding. Nora yelled as she ran at Rhaega and jumped to land, a spinning kick against his arm. The bubbly girl threw out as many punches as fast as she could as her strikes rang out again along the blades. Her fist met steel rapidly as a barrage of punches were blocked and deflected by Rhaega. Rhaega struggled against her advances as he knocked aside her punches with considerable effort. He noticed that the longer they fought, the more power was behind the short girl's punches. He yelled as he knocked Nora's fist down and then slammed them back up into her chin. He knocked Nora off her feet before smacking her away with a spinning kick. His leg was caught when Ren dashed in and grabbed the outstretched limb. The green-clad boy pushed the man back and forced him to the ground. Rhaega quickly clambered up to his feet as Ren dashed in and kicked at his head. Rhaega blocked Ren's flurry of kicks and lashed out with the swab of his sword. Rhaega lunged for Ren's head, and when the boy avoided, he stepped in and swung both blades across his chest. This forced Ren to dodge too far and fall to the wet ground. Rhaega flipped the sword in his hand and prepared to pierce down into the fallen boy. Ren leaped up and into Rhaega's legs, making the swordsman stumble back. He raised his blade up to attack again. "Oh, no, you don't!" Nora came running in and grabbed Rhaega's hands before he could hurt her friend anymore. The short, orange-haired girl struggled to hold back the taller man as she stood on her toes to grab his wrist. Rhaega groaned and struggled to escape the duo that had bound his arms and legs. He clicked his teeth in annoyance before deciding to stop them from interfering altogether. Sparks started spraying over his body before he released a massive discharge of electricity around himself. He felt the boy locking his legs spasm from the voltage and scream in pain before releasing his bolt. But the girl... Nora looked up at Rhaega with a big smirk as the green-haired man looked in surprise. The yellow lightning from his shock just seemed to dance over her body before fading under her skin and turning pink. The pink lightning accumulated around her biceps, and Rhaega yelled in pain. When Nora turned his wrist with ease, yet he still held his blades. Nora threw his arms out and pulled her fist back before punching him in the chest. "Here!" Rhaega was blown off his feet and sent tumbling down the street from the force of her punch. Nora took the chance to help a groggy Ren back up to his feet. As Rhaega halted his travel down the street, the former mercenary fell to a knee, clutching his chest as he seethed and growled, "Okay, no more playing around, you! Move!" Ren saw a dark green blur pass by as Rhaega grabbed his blade. He lashed out and landed the hilt of his sword against Kiba's face as the Inuzaka's fist planted itself in Rhaega's cheek. The two were knocked back by their mutual attack before Kiba charged and started exchanging blows with the larger man. "Nora, catch!" The bubbly juniper girl looked back and quickly caught the small hammer tossed to her. She looked up from her new makeshift weapon to see Tenten with a pained expression across her face. Nora gripped the camera tightly before asking the brunette, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'll be fine." Tenten stood back up with some effort in her movement before she looked around at the chaos they were enveloped in. She looked at the partners for clarity. "What happened? I remember trying to stop Sasuke's brother from fighting anymore, and then I felt a bad shock, and it went black. What's going on?" "It's a long story." Ren lifted himself up and ignored his pain before narrowing his eyes. "But right now, we just need to hold them back, hold these people off. And I think what Kiba says works best. Less talking." Nora gripped her compact hammer and channeled electricity around her body. "More fighting! Here!" Ren followed his partner to rejoin the fight against the green-haired swordsman as Tenten looked over at the other fighters. Blake and Yang were holding back their explosive energy while Weiss and Pierre continued to gain an opening against Gurren. Tenten took a sharp breath and started running. Changed her aura to her steel and covered her body. She held out her hands, creating several knives that she threw at the blue-haired assassin. Gurren saw them coming and raised the wall of crystal in defense. Weiss and Pierre looked back to see her as Tenten yelled, "Pierre! Throw me!" The redhead raised one hand and Tenten felt herself get lifted off her feet. Pure used her polarity on her steel to send her flying at the wall and break through the crystal completely. Gurren looked in surprise as she stood back up and deflected Tenten's knives. Weiss fired a barrage of icicles as Pure charged in to face her in close quarters. Da! An explosion came from the side and forced the girls away from Gurren as the crystal user caught her breath. The other came sliding to her side and helped his comrade to her feet. Despite the reluctant look on her face from his assistants, he crossed his arms and sprinted forward as Blake and Yang came to join the trio in their fight. The blonde bomber released a massive set of explosions at the beacon students as Gurren charged in to assist. The Uchiha members jumped out of the smoke and attacked the stunned students. The other blew several of them off of their feet while Gurren ducked beneath their field of vision and swiped the legs out beneath them. They fell but quickly picked themselves up before engaging the two in another fight. Deidre kept Pyrrha and Tenten at bay as he dodged the thrust from Weiss. Letters quickly blocked another of his blasts with her glyphs as he leaned back to avoid the katana and punched aim for his head. Deidre used a handspring kick to force the two girls back, and he launched himself up with his explosion to get over them. He flew over them and turned with a spin kick to catch Blake's arm before she could attack him. Yang took the opportunity to come charging in from his blind spot, but stopped when she froze in place. She looked down to see Crystal at all the way up to his ankles and halting her movement entirely as the other escaped her reach. The brawler was enraged by his escape and roared at the top of her lungs, the rain around her evaporating from the fire and heat wafting off of her body. She pulled herself out of her confinement and looked back at the blue-haired woman that had caught her. Yang yelled as she discharged her weapon to send herself flying at Gurren. Gurren lowered her stance, and when Yang's fist came down on her, she blocked it with both hands, and before she could fire a kinetic blast at the former assassin, Yang's gauntlets and fists were covered in a slit of crystal that snuffed out the blast. Yang's red eyes widened in shock before she felt a foot dig into her cheek and sent her flying back into a streetlight. Gurren landed back on her feet, but had quickly dashed away as Blake and Weiss both came across to strike her. The two girls moved in tandem to strike at the older woman as Gurren invaded their thrusts and slashes. Weiss repelled the barrage of attacks. Weiss repeated barrage of attacks were defended against by a coat of crystal. Gurren had covered her hands in to protect herself. She got in close and kicked the carriers off of her feet before turning back and grabbing Blake's blade before it could come down at her neck. She swung up into Blake's chin, but the bow-wearing girl escaped using her shadow to take the hit. Gurren spun back up to her feet and threw a shard at Weiss's head as the hair somersaulted out of its way. As Weiss landed back on her feet, she turned her revolver on her blade and chambered the rapier as the blade glowed yellow. She yelled and lunged for the blue-haired woman. Yeah! Rhaegar ran in and blocked Weiss's blade before he could connect with Gurren. There was a massive discharge between his electricity and her pure energy that knocked them both away and gave Gurren the opportunity to send a wave of projectiles at the stunned Harris. Yeah! Ha! Yang and Blake destroyed each crystal before it even got close to the teammate. The girl stood tall as they heard a loud grunt and explosion as the dealer jumped back into view with a stumble. Rega steadied his comrade before he could fall over, and the Uchiha members took their stances against their opponents. Pyrrha and Teten came back to their friend's side as they heard a pair of loud screams and roars. The Beacon students looked up in shock as Kiba pounced over their heads and slammed his fist down on the manhole in front of him. The sewer plate flew up in the air, and Ren was the next to run past them and kick it up even higher. Finally, there was one last flash of lightning, and everyone looked up to see Nora raising her hammer up over the manhole and yell, "Here!" With the power of her semblance working in overdrive, she slammed the manhole down with her new hammer and watched the metallic cover fly like a missile down at her opponent. Gurren's eyes widened and she raised the wall of crystal that shattered beneath the force of the giant projectile. Rega stopped the manhole with the swing of his blades and struggled to stop it even with his own strength. The leader came over and blasted the manhole from the side, sending it flying into a building to their side hard enough to embed it into the concrete. Okay. Rega caught his breath and looked back towards their opponents as the Beacon students gathered together. Their hair was matted by the rain, and there were clear signs of their fatigue from this battle. But even as the hunters in training caught their breath or steadied their trembling hands, they stood ready for the next round. Rega's face twisted with frustration as his sword shook from his tight grip. "I'm losing my patience with these kids. I'll admit, they definitely got into Beacon for a reason." Gurren took a deep breath and looked around the damage they had caused to the street and buildings. "We should have considered inviting them to join our side." "Whatever." They looked towards Deidara as he narrowed his eyes in anger. "They're still getting in the way of us stopping Sasuke and getting to Itachi. No more fucking around. We don't need to fight them. We need to get past them. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking bullet and block. Get them out of the way and force them back while we head to Itachi." Gurren didn't expect him to make that call. "You want to retreat? This wasn't supposed to be a fight anyway," Vidra said with no small amount of indignation as he closed his arms in front of him and caused the Beacon students to raise their guard. "Ready? Ready? Yep. Launch." Gurren raised her hand and a spire of crystal popped up under Deidara's feet and launched him forward with immense speed towards the Beacon students as the blonde spun and used his explosion. His entire form was one massive fire bullet that forced the students to block and avoid his path. Rega sheathed his sword and wrapped his arm around Gurren's waist before sprinting down the path Deidara had made. They passed the stunned students and reached the street behind them before they could recover. Pyrrha and Blake were the first to notice, then followed after them with swords at the ready. Rega dropped Gurren and the blue-haired woman slammed her hands down into the accumulated rainwater. She raised them back up, and a massive wall of crystal sprung up between them and the students. The Beacon kids all started attacking the wall and trying to bring it down, but realized it was much thicker than the walls she had raised before. The crystal stretched from the building on one side to another and completely blocked their chance to follow. Blake hissed and jumped in the air, using her semblance as stepping stones to reach the top of the massive makeshift barrier. When she reached the top of the crystal wall, she ran over its length and reached the other end. She looked over to the side to see a broken car door lying in the street beside a dry spot where a parked car once been. She couldn't even hear the car screech out over the sound of thunder and police sirens, no doubt coming their way after the skirmish in the middle of the street. "Ruby, get there soon. Naruto, please hold on. Hunting, I asked you what you were. Answer me." Naruto writhed in pain and lifted himself up on his hands and knees, his eyes filling with tears from the pain. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Fox Faunus. First year, cut the crap," Itachi yelled. "That thing you just were, was that your semblance or something else? Are there others? Tell me." Naruto's arm shook as he pushed off the ground, and he fell onto his knees and feet. The blonde's head hung as he gasped for breath. The rain ran down his chin. Itachi's eyes narrowed as he realized he wouldn't be able to answer while he was still reeling from shock. Fine, if he had information and was somehow connected to what was happening inside the White Fang, they couldn't kill him just yet. Itachi reached down and grabbed the blonde by his collar. "You're coming with me." Naruto didn't make a move, and Itachi forced him up to his feet. "Get up!" Ugh! Naruto yelled as his hand came out from behind his back and he sliced up into Itachi's chin. The Uchiha's eyes widened before he knocked the hand and hidden knife away as Itachi's body glowed before fading away. The knife cut took out the last of his aura and grabbed Naruto's shoulder. "Ugh!" Itachi's eyes shuddered as he looked down to see a second hidden knife in Naruto's right hand. A small blade of the knife pierced into Itachi's abdomen, and without aura, there was no deterrent. Blood dripping down the blade and coating the blonde's hand. Itachi gasped before Naruto pulled it out and stabbed him in the same spot. Again and again and again. Itachi's yells overlapped Naruto's desperate cry as the blonde fawn stabbed to Uchiha. Itachi locked the arm stabbing into his abdomen and slammed a palm against Naruto's shoulder. Hearing a satisfied pop as the arm went limp and released the knife, his hands blurred and he punched Naruto across the face, splitting his nose and sending the blonde tumbling on over into the ground. Itachi stumbled and fell back, looking down at the wound and the blood gushing out from where the blade was still lodged into him. He took short, raspy breaths and looked over where Naruto was still lying on the ground, fading out of consciousness. Itachi gasped and groaned in pain as he forced himself up to his feet and steadily walked over to No! Two mangled hands wrapped around Itachi's chest as he was lifted off his feet and thrown back several yards. He tumbled and rolled over the ground, feeling his abdomen wound spike with pain as he covered it to stop any more blood flow. He looked up to see his eyes slowly widen. He saw Sasuke standing between him and the furnace, his younger brother panting with a pained look in his eyes. Itachi looked down and noticed his hands covered in burns and blood. He quickly noticed another blonde boy in armor and the girl with the red-tipped hair coming in from the side and go to Naruto's aid. John looked down at his friend and lifted up his head and shoulders. Naruto! Come on! Ruby's voice was panicked and about to crack as she shook her friend's shoulder in an attempt to get a response. Say something, please! Sasuke took a deep gulp and his shoulders were shaking as he tried to focus on Itachi. The younger Uchiha looked over his brother and noticed the dust in his arm and the bloody wound in his lower chest. But the moment Sasuke took a step forward to help him, Itachi tensed up like he was expecting an attack. Sasuke stopped and stood in shock as he looked around at what had happened. The broken buildings, burning piles of metal and wood, the furrows in the concrete that looked like a giant had dug through them, the state Naruto was in, and what had happened to his brother. This was because of him. Itachi. Sasuke's voice reached his older brother as his expression shook. I'm sorry, but I can't kill Naruto, and I can't hunt or kill anyone when I know they don't deserve to die. He shook his head. The White Fang need to be stopped, but not like this. Not at the cost of you or any of the others becoming something else. Becoming killing machines to the point you won't even be recognizable to who you were. Itachi's shoulders relaxed as the tension started to fade. Sasuke continued over the sound of thunder and rain. I know I said I was prepared to fight any battle by your side, but I can't. But we don't have to keep fighting like this anymore. We don't have to keep moving, staying away from the populated areas, and burying our friends. He yelled. We can hunt and keep Grim at bay. We can protect settlements from being overrun, be policemen, soldiers, hunters, anything. He gritted his teeth. I just don't want to lose my brother again. Itachi could only stare in silence as he looked up at his brother. Sasuke caught his breath and stepped forward. Just let me help you with your wounds. Sasuke was blown back by a blast of fire hitting him square in the chest. John and Ruby looked up and called out to their injured friend. As Sasuke lifted himself up, he saw a car with a missing door come skidding a few feet away as Deidara and the others clambered out of the car and came to Itachi's side. Itachi, shit, what happened? Gurren looked him over. Did that furnace do this to you? Deidara. Itachi groaned as he sat up with some help from his comrades. Cauterize the wound. You can't be. Do it! Deidara scowled before grabbing the small knife and ripping it out of Itachi's wound. He didn't even have time to yell before Deidara pressed his palm against the wound and released a small explosion as Deidara threw his head back. No! Itachi pushed off the ground as he ran towards them to check on his brother. Gurren saw him charging in and swung her hand out as a crystal shard flung out at him. Ruby dashed in and spun crescent rolls around to deflect them all and protect Sasuke. Rhaega's grip tightened. We have to go. He's right. We can't waste any more time fighting. Gurren agreed. I'm sorry, but we have to go. Deidara lifted one of Itachi's arms and wrapped it around his shoulder as Gurren did the same on his other side. They lifted the injured Uchiha and headed for the car. Come on, we'll get you fixed up. Itachi! They stopped and looked back after hearing Sasuke yell out for him. Itachi lifted his head and looked over at Sasuke desperately, pleading, look, please. Itachi turned away and muttered to his comrades as they continued forward. Let's go. Itachi's eyes widened in horror as he watched his brother get carried off. The others helped him into the car and got in before it started off down the street. Ruby gripped her scythe and thought about chasing after them before she looked up at Sasuke. He looked so crushed, sadder than she had ever seen the usually cool and collected boy look before. She hesitated. Guys, I think Sasuke stopped breathing. The two looked back in horror and ran back over to Naruto's side. They looked down at the bruised and beaten Faunus before Sasuke lowered his ears to his mouth. He was still breathing, but barely. Help me lift him up. Sasuke put his arms under Naruto's legs and shoulders. His hands arched in pain as he attempted to lift him up. John and Ruby helped steady him before Sasuke looked around the street. He looked back at Ruby and copied her semblance. Hold on, Naruto. Just hold on. Sasuke dashed down the street in a burst of speed as purple petals fluttered behind him. The two younger leaders watched them leave before John spoke. He's gonna be okay, right? Ruby's eyes trembled. I don't know. He gulped and looked back over there where Naruto had been fighting in while they were held captive. There was so much destruction and fire and blood. What happened to him? Hunting. John and Ruby sat together in the waiting area of the hospital floor as the sounds of doctors, nurses, and the other patients walking around the halls filled the silence they fell into. Drops of rain continued to slide off their faces and onto the ground as they waited for any news about their friend. John fidgeted in his seat, looking back and forth across the hall. He looked at the girl next to him to see Ruby's shoulders hunch over and her face gripping into her stockings and knees. She looked so much smaller with her hood on. John wanted to get her to pat her shoulder and tell her it was going to be okay, but he really didn't know if that was true right now. He still had a hard time believing that what happened was real, that Naruto was a Faunus and he used to be part of the White Fang. Did that mean he hated humans? Did he hate them? And Sasuke was supposed to kill him? He just couldn't believe the two people he thought of as closest friends were supposed to kill each other. And those other Uchiha guys, the ones that weren't actually Sasuke's family, where did they go? Were they going to come back? And Sasuke's brother, was he going to make it? Would they see him again? He was really scared. Ruby! They looked up to see Yang and the others arrive at the elevator. There were some shushes from the other nurses, but they were ignored in place of Yang embracing her younger sister so tightly that she might have broken her if she squeezed her tighter. But instead of the usual protest Ruby gave when she was caught in one of Yang's hugs, the shorter girl just hugged her sister back and relished the fact she was okay. John was nearly knocked off his feet as well when Pierre ran in and hugged him. He didn't get a chance to return it as Nora hugged him as well, and Ren looked relieved to see he was okay. John returned the embrace. I'm so glad you guys are okay. They separated. What took you so long? It was the police, and Pyrrha said. They had questions for us about who we were fighting and what happened. Those crazy bastards got by us and escaped while we got held back for questioning. Kiba growled. It's bullshit. Yang finally pulled back from Ruby and looked her over. What happened? Did you make it in time? Did those guys? Ruby squeezed her sister's hand. Those guys came over in a car and picked up Sasuke's brother. He was bleeding really badly. We were going to try chasing after him, but Naruto. She looked back at John and the two shared a conflicted look. We had to make sure he was okay first. John comforted her little sister as Blake nodded. That was the right thing to do, Ruby. What? Tenten stepped forward looking a little pale but steeling herself to ask her young friend. What about Sasuke? He carried Naruto here, John told them. His hands were still really bad, but he picked Naruto up and copied Ruby's semblance before running here. Kiba looked around. Well, where is he? A few doctors saw how bad his hands were and took him down some floors for surgery. Some of the others grimaced at the thought that his hands were so bad he needed medical attention. So, Ren was the only one who spoke up and asked the questions they were all dreading to ask him. What about Naruto? John and Ruby remained silent. Their eyes lowered and they failed to even look up at their partner and family. John opened his mouth, but they were interrupted as the doors opened and a young nurse walked out in a scrub. She looked around before noticing the small gathering of people. Are all of you with Naruto Uzumaki? There was a round of nods. Are any of you related to him? No. Tenten shook her head. But he has a dad who lives in Mistral. Can you give me any of his contact information? Hey, Kiba stepped past the others to face the nurse. What's happening? I'm sorry, sir, but we need to inform his family and loved ones. He's my damn partner, Kiba said loudly. We're his team and friends, and we're here now, so tell us what's wrong. The nurse seemed unruffled by Kiba's increase in volume, probably accustomed to loud outbursts and demands from other families and people demanding updates. But she looked around at the worry and concern on the students' faces and seemed to relent. Your friend, he's in critical condition. Tendon covered her mouth and Nora hid in Ren's shirt while he comforted her. Yang was perplexed by her phrasing. What does that mean? What happened? I'm not sure what happened. No one has told me how this boy received such grievous injuries, or why there was a cut in his stomach filled with ice. She turned to face them. Right now, the doctor is trying to remove the pieces of ice from his organs without tearing the flesh. He also had a lot of internal bleeding, and they need to close it before it gets any worse. Well, that's easy, Kiba said. Now it can heal. We know. She interrupted. Those two already informed us of your friend's ability, and that was part of the problem of why we need to focus right now. What do you mean? Ruby looked horrified by what she was saying. Apparently, his body was trying to heal his wounds even with the obstruction blocking them, and I'm not sure if he keeps moving or fighting while he was injured, but it exacerbated his wounds. There's scarring along his stomach lining and blood pulling around under the skin. So, the nurse was silent as she looked between the students before speaking with a tone of comfort. So just pray for your friend and hope for the best. The students looked at her in shock before she turned to Kiba. I need to contact his family. Please. Kiba looked at her in silence and solemn sadness as he followed her to the desk. Pira hugged Tenten closely as the girl started to sob for the state of her teammate. Blake lowered her head as Yang hugged Ruby even tighter. The red-clad girl hid in her sister's chest before opening her eyes. Where's... She wiped her eyes. Where's Wise? Hunting. Weiss opened the door to the front desk I pointed her to. When she looked inside, she saw the dark-haired Uchiha sitting on the edge of the bed. He just stared ahead to the other side of the room while his hands rested on his knees, bandaged halfway up to the forearm with splotches of blood near the fingertips. As she walked in, she caught his attention as he looked up at her. He didn't say anything as he looked back down while she stepped closer to the bed. She crossed her arms and settled back on her feet as she coughed and pointed out. The desk said that you'll be going into surgery soon. He didn't respond. She scowled. What about your hands? Are you feeling any better? Still no response. Don't know why she even bothered asking. She could still see the blood stain his bandages. She closed her eyes and decided to do away with the soft approach. They were too far past that to even try. I heard rumors being passed around the company when I was still in Atlas about a group of people that were apparently secretly opposing sects of the White Fang members before they attacked our shipments and stations. She noticed Sasuke look away from the wall to see her in the corner of his eyes. I thought that if I ever meet them, I would like to thank them for their noble work, but I suppose after tonight, I might have to reconsider that idea. There's nothing noble about what they did, Sasuke finally spoke, his voice low and raspy after everything that had happened today. She had hoped he had taken the painkillers the staff had given him while they prepared for the operation. We tried to rationalize it with a cause, but there were a bunch of different reasons we decided to fight, because we thought it would be fun, because we wanted to make other people hurt for once, and I guess because some of us just wanted to fight. She couldn't understand that. As nice as it would have been to have a group of noble knights take up the cause to fight a terrible evil and protect the innocent, it just sounded so too storybook and romantic. Nothing was that bright and hopeful. The Uchiha legacy had never been one filled with glitter and gold, but knowing it was now recruiting people like that and resorting to such measures and kidnapping all of them to get their target, how the mighty had fallen. Weiss's eyes narrowed before looking back up at the boy. Was it all true? Everything they said is Naruto? Weiss. Naruto stopped her. Do you really need me to answer that? The ivory-haired girl scowled and fumed at his behavior. What is wrong with you? I know this was terrible, but you could at least bother to look at me. Terrible? Sasuke repeated in a sharp and harsh tone. This was so much worse than terrible. This spiraled out of control. He covered his eyes and gritted his teeth. I thought I could handle this. I thought I would be able to convince Itachi that I was right. And now... His hands gripped his hair and trembled from the pain. Naruto was nearly killed. Itachi's gone. And all of you were... Sasuke, this is my fault. This is all my fault. Sasuke muttered. I never should have tried to do something I'm not. Being a huntsman. Stop. Weiss yelled with ferret eyes as she refused to hear him degrade himself like that. There was nothing you could have done. This wasn't your fault. It was. She stopped herself before she finished that sentence. Her eyes widened and she covered her mouth at the realization of whose name she was about to finish with. But even though it was horrible, and even though he was just upstairs in such serious condition, this was his fault, wasn't it? Weiss. She looked back up at Sasuke as he sat back on the bed and rested his bloody hands at his side. He rested his head and turned away from her. Please, just leave. She wanted to scream. Rage filled her thoughts, and her hands started to shake from how tightly she was gripping her fist. She stared at him in shock that he could say something like that to her after everything they had gone through. The fights and moments of conversation. She'd been more open with him than even her own team, and now Weiss shook with anger. Before she huffed and stopped at the room, she prepared to slam the door behind her before controlling herself and quietly closing it. Once that was done, the hero stood in the nearly empty hallway just staring at the floor. Weiss narrowed her eyes and reached down to pull something out of her pocket. She looked down and glared. The picture of Naruto that revealed that he was a member of the White Faunus. She picked it up during all the commotion in the abandoned building, and the side stamped from how long she stood in the rain. Depending on what she did with this picture, there was a lot of outcomes playing down as there was a lot of outcomes playing out in front of her. The hero sighed, pocketing the picture before stepping down the hall and sitting down in a seat. She felt her eyes start to strain, something between fighting off fatigue and the building urge to let her eyes water. Who could she trust anymore? Who was on her side and who wasn't? But most importantly, who might they already trust? That certainly didn't deserve it. And chapter 38.